Hello, welcome to Whiskey for Beginners. I'm Robert McKay. The title cards tell you what kind of deal this is. And today I want to deal with the question of what are some broad categories of whiskey. Now these are my classifications. You get into legal definitions and things are different. But I personally classify whiskey by its major grain, the dominant grain they call it. And so you have corn whiskey, whiskey that's made from mostly corn, barley whiskey, which is made from mostly barley, and rye whiskey, which is made from mostly rye. In the United States, you have definitions for these. But within the broad category of corn whiskey, you get the legal corn whiskey, plus you have bourbon, which does not meet the legal definition for corn whiskey. But both have corn as the dominant grain in the mash bill. The same for rye whiskey. Well, rye whiskey is different from corn whiskey in that there's not a legal division within there. But barley whiskey becomes interesting because for some reason, even though American English is so expressive, when it comes to barley, distillers use British terms. Instead of talking about barley whiskey, they talk about what they wrongly say as one word, single malt. And I have trouble talking that fast. It is not natural. But barley whiskey, by my personal definition, is a whiskey that, like rye whiskey, has a mash bill of at least 51% barley. It can be sprouted or unsprouted. And what they call a single malt, it's really two words. You look at it on the label, it's two words, single malt, is really just a barley whiskey where the mash bill is 100% sprouted barley. Somebody needs to, just to shake these Brit type people up, somebody needs to make a whiskey with a mash bill of 100% unsprouted barley and watch everybody scratch their heads trying to figure out what to call it. Then there are the national categories. There's American whiskey, and we produce whiskey unlike anybody else. Scottish whiskey, Irish whiskey, and those two are very similar. Japanese whiskey originated when some guy whose name I disremember went to Scotland, learned how to make whiskey in their fashion, and then went back to Japan and made whiskey that same way. And so I've not had any Japanese whiskey, but apparently it is similar to, but not identical to, Scottish whiskey. Then you can categorize whiskey by proof. There's low proof, which in the United States is no lower than 80 proof. And in American proof, you divide by 2 to get the alcohol by volume. So 80 proof is 40% alcohol by volume. And then you have your medium proof and then your high proof. And where you make those divisions is really not definite. To me, low proof is anywhere from, say, 80 to 100. Medium is 100 up to, say, 120. And then high proof would be 120 on up. Now, there is what they call hazmat whiskey, which is 140 and above. And they call it that because the alcohol is so, I'm saying that wrong, there's so much alcohol in it, it's very flammable, and they won't let you ship it by air. It's just too dangerous. And so those are some broad categories of whiskey, and they may help you to think about things. For instance, what is bourbon? Well, it's a corn whiskey because it has corn as the dominant grain. What's Scotch whiskey? Well, they have different kinds. There's single malt, blended malt, all this, but it's basically a barley whiskey. Canadian whiskey can be a rye whiskey. That seems to be their dominant grain, although Canadians will call it rye whiskey even if there's no rye in it at all. You get bourbon and corn whiskey and rye whiskey. Well, those are all American whiskey. You get Jack Daniel's single barrel proof. Well, that is anywhere from a medium to a high proof because each barrel varies. And so you get these broad categories, and that may help you to think about whiskey a little more clearly. Meanwhile, that's the end of the video. I'm trying not to just end them abruptly as I did for so long. So without a glass in my hand, I just want to say cheers.